tremendously evil this livestock industry is. And I like to use the word livestock, even though I know that it's controversial within the animal movement, but I think it's clear. I don't want to say animal agriculture because that sounds nice. I don't want to say meat because that's leaving out dairy and eggs. So I actually do intentionally use livestock just so that the impact of it is real. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Again, a well-fed world. I'm going to get right into it because we don't have a whole lot of time. So I'm speaking to you as activists. Sometimes I do this talk trying to convince people of the connections and why it's important. I'm going to speak to you as activists that already get it. I'm not going to go over the actual hunger numbers, but so that if you want to speak to others, you have some basic talking points, and then just also for your own education, you have some nuance to some of these concepts, because a lot of you will not be speaking on the hunger issue. This is not the most popular, but it is important, and it's also important because it shows we care about people, and sometimes when someone wants to give you a hard time, you can have a few talking points. So the biggest reason is, not the biggest, but the most popular, is that meat is very crop intensive. It's also just generally resource intensive. If we were doing the environmental section, we could talk about the energy, water, land use, and things of that nature. But I'm going to focus just on the crops. And a lot of you already know this. Those of you who have been studying these issues at all or have been around, you know that animals consume much more food than they produce. So that's really basic. Animals consume much more food than they produce. And these are some conversion ratios. So what this is, I like to show these numbers. If a lot of you are familiar with like the 16-to-1 ratio for cows, it's kind of back from the 90s. And it's popular in activist circles, but you'll hear a wide range. And so we did a talk earlier on numbers and the importance of understanding why there's a range and why there's calculations and what are the implications as far as who's giving you the numbers and why. So if you hear other folks who will say, no, it's more like a 7-to-1 or 10-to-1 for cows, there's a distinction between live weight ratio and edible weight ratio. And I'm going to try not to get too boring on this, but this is a really important distinction because somebody might say, no, I've got some numbers. If you work in the food justice community at all and with non-vegans, they might point to these lower numbers. And that's not edible weight. So that's the live weight of the animal before there's no bones and blood and everything's taken out, it's packaged, the fat's removed. So by the time you get to the edible weight, it's much higher. And these numbers are from scientist Blackloff-Schmiel, and we have it on our website at awfw.org, as well as some of the other information with the details. So you can see the numbers are much higher when you're talking about once you're talking about packaged meat. And when I say meat, I'm often also talking about dairy and eggs, but it's a shorthand. So when we're talking about, well, the use of resources, well, if we don't eat it, it's going to feed the world, and we know it doesn't just happen that way. If we're not using the crops, it doesn't just automatically feed the world. So it's important to be able to make the point for size of scale that we could feed the world if we weren't redistributing these resources to be used for animal feed and also biofuels that you'll hear a lot about and waste, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But it's not just that, oh, now the food's there and people are fed. But it does have a real impact in that it affects prices. It's not the only thing that affects prices, other things affect prices, but you can get the basic idea that increased meat uses more food resources, so it increases the demand for crops, and if that's a relatively fixed supply, then it's going to increase the price of crops, and you're going to literally outbid the poorest of the poor. And that's the way in which the U.S. consumption and other wealthy consumers, as far as in other countries, or even wealthy consumers, high consumers in poorer countries, are pulling the resources away from the poorest of the poor because they're being outbid. And during the 80s, the famine in Ethiopia, this is one of the things that really actually impacted me and kind of shaped where I was going to end up, is that Ethiopia was actually exporting food during the famine. So they were exporting crops to be used as animal feed. So, and that still happens. That's not just a specific case. That happens. So redistributing, but also increasing the price, which increases hunger. And we also saw this recently during the food crisis when there was a contraction. And so you might think, and realistically, if we could just keep increasing supply, it would not matter as much, but we don't. We have limited resources, and if anything, what's going to be happening is that supply of food and crops is going to become increasingly constricted because we have increasing population, less land available, pollution that's reducing productivity, and climate change that is reducing productivity. I'm also just going to really quick, I know supply and demand is everybody's favorite. So I'm going to do a quick, easy way to show why this matters. So if I have this many apples and everybody here wants an apple, I can get $5 an apple for these because somebody's going to pay me $5 an apple. If I've just got 4 or 5, or maybe $3, right? But if I have all these apples and all of you, I'm not going to be able to get the same amount of money. Then maybe I have to get $1, 50 cents. So the higher the supply, the lower the price. So if we have more crops available, we can get that downward pressure on the prices to help alleviate hunger. This is one of the really key ways that you can talk to people, is bringing it into terms they already know, because they might try to fight you because they don't want to stop eating meat. So, but if they care about biofuels, then you can use that. So the UN Food Director said that biofuels were a crime against humanity. A crime against humanity specifically because of the impact on food. And there's a whole big debate about fuel versus food. So if people understand that that's a problem, then they should also understand the redistribution of crops for livestock, because it's much greater. This is how much greater. 36%. So over a third of global crops use, edible crops, are going towards livestock feed. Only 5% for biofuels. But everybody's in an uproar. Not everybody, but people are in an uproar. People who count. People at the UN. People are protesting about biofuels. But they're not getting the point. If you care about biofuels, then you should not be eating animals and their products. It's also worse than waste. So if people are concerned about food waste, why are they concerned about food waste? If you're concerned about food waste, meat and using animals for food more generally is a form of waste. If you're concerned about food waste, meat is worse. Meat is a form of waste. It's worse than waste. And again, with the numbers that we saw, you can make the case. So meat itself, also because of the use of crops, is a form of waste. So again, this is for you as activists. I want to just do a couple take-home points. So I'll slow it down, because it's easy to start talking a little fast. Animals eat more than they produce. That's the basic. Animals eat more than they produce. Increases the price of staple foods. Please don't act like it's going to create a vegan world would create a world without hunger. So, I mean, if we could snap our fingers and create a utopia, then yes. But just being vegan is not enough to solve global hunger. We also have other issues, and so be nuanced in how you approach that. And also, I would be mindful of using the terms you use. Starvation, for example. Not everybody's starving. Most people who are dying of hunger and hunger-related causes, from undernutrition and undernutrition by means of lack of calories and lack of quality. So that's also something to be mindful on word choice. And then finally, meat is a form of redistribution, as we discussed. Overconsumption, because all those crops being used, all that energy being used, it's a form of overconsumption, and then waste. So not just the crops waste, but also food, water. If you're talking to somebody, you might not want to talk about redistribution unless they are a little more knowledgeable, but certainly you can put in terms of food waste and biofuels, and that should be something that people get. I briefly want to talk about climate, because this is really important. Climate is a hunger multiplier, and it's of course directly related, as many of you know, to the consumption of animals is a direct intensifier. This is back in the 2006 report from the UN that transportation, let me see that, the next one? Nope, okay. I took a slide out for time. That eating less meat equals less global warming. Plain and simple. So anybody who cares about global warming, you can get them handouts, you can find out more research, and you can just get a few key points. But eating animals increases global warming more than all transportation combined, and that was from the UN report in 2006. If you know the report about 51%, we have the information that breaks down why the World Watch magazine report says 51% of all greenhouse gases come from livestock. And the short version of that that I like to focus on, again, is with the numbers, is that 18% from the UN that says still more than all transportation combined is over a 100-year time frame. Methane equals much more greenhouse gases. So it's much higher potency than carbon dioxide. So 20 to 25 times over a 100-year time span, and that's the number. Just like we were talking about the industry numbers before, That's an industry number, 20 to 25. But if we're talking about a 20-year time span, that goes up to 84 times. If we're talking about a 5-year time span, it goes up to 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide. It also has a shorter half-life. We can pull it out of the air. So if we cut our meat consumption, stop using animals for food, we can drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which will then also help hunger. The people hit worse with the climate change are those who can least afford it. So along the coast, people who depend on rural subsistence farming, just little increases. The natural disasters are hitting. But even if you're not hit by a natural disaster, just those increasing climate changes will increase the problems you're having and decrease yields. So methane is huge. I like to focus on that a lot. And then the other thing, and this is going to be great for people who get hit with the grass-fed argument, land clearing. So land clearing, also known as deforestation, that's the potency, sorry. Land clearing also is the deforestation, so it's the same thing. So what's great about this particular concept is if it's food, if it's crops, like we just talked about how inefficient it is for having to grow all those more crops for feeding the animals, then you're having to clear land and grow these monocultures. But if they're grass-fed, and this is where a lot of environmentalists will try to come at you, or a lot of meat eaters, and like, oh, I only eat grass-fed meat. But the animals who are grass-fed emit much more methane. So we just talked before about how it's 84 to 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And when animals, ruminants, not all animals, but ruminants, cows, goats, sheep, are grass-fed, it is actually better from an animal welfare perspective, but they're emitting 3 to 4 times more methane. I'm actually giving you the conservative number. There's some of the research that says 4 times, and these are scientists that are saying it, not vegan scientists. Scientists who don't care, but we'll still talk about methane emissions and what they can do to mitigate it as opposed to what we can do to stop producing so much methane by not eating the animals in the first place. So this is your argument for the environmentalist and the grass-fed people. 3 to 4 times more methane, so they may be saving something on the pollution side or air quality side, the electricity side, but they're contributing to climate change. And cheese, I'm sorry, vegetarians. Not sorry, I don't know. Anyway, cheese is the number 3 greenhouse gas emission concentration because it's coming from cows and there's a lot of processes, and cheese is very concentrated dairy, more adult life, more. So you don't, I'll just stop there, you don't get let off. So 70% of the Amazon is being grazed, and this was, I'm glad I got this put it in there because I'm going fast again, but losing photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is one of the ways we actually get to pull greenhouse gases from the air. So not only are we emitting more greenhouse gases, we're losing one of the main ways we have to pull greenhouse gases from the air. But you got to be careful when we talk about the grass-fed beef and dairy, is that then we're making the argument, argument is used by factory farmers to promote factory farming. So we don't want to promote factory farming, but then we talk about their very high energy intensity. So either way they lose, but they will try to pit each other against it. And this is just a brief note that greenhouse gases, when it is factory farm, they're actually about the same. So cows are the ones known for the methane, rightfully so, but when everybody's in a factory farm, it's more about the energy processes, and so by weight, it's actually about the same, and most people don't know that, so it's kind of an interesting little point. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. We're going to have a little bit of Q&A here. I'm sorry that I can't stay, but if you're staying, I'm staying around Sunday night, so after the closing session, I'll be available. Thank you again, and thank you. Okay.
All right, so let's